There is a building on Peachtree Street in Atlanta that stays lit all night long. Two lights burn past 1 in the morning. One on the 38th floor, the pale blue glow of a monitor belonging to a man worth $3.1 billion, who has spent the last 3 years paying a private investigator to find a daughter he walked away from before he understood what walking away would cost. One on the ground floor, moving, the warm yellow sweep of a janitorial cart belonging to a woman who earns $13.25 an hour, who has cleaned that building 5 nights a week for 3 years, who has walked past the elevator to the 38th floor 647 times without knowing the answer to a question she stopped asking at 16, was sitting in a locked drawer 40 floors above her head. He was looking for her. She had already found the letter. Neither of them knew the other existed. Not yet. Before we begin, drop your city and your local time in the comments right now. I read every single one, and there is something I want to ask you at the end of this story that I think you are going to feel. If you are new here, this is the place for stories about dignity and what people carry and the moments that change everything. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications now. Let's begin. Yvette Caldwell started her shift at 10:47 in the evening, the same time she had started it for the past 3 years. She badged in through the service entrance on the south side of Peachtree Center, the one with the dent frame that nobody had fixed since March that smelled like concrete to apply to concrete and floor stripper while her eyes adjusted to the light. Then she pulled her cart from the supply room, checked her list, and began. This was the shape of her night. Floors 36 through 38 first, while the last of the office workers were clearing out. Then down to 22 and 23, the accounting firms that left the most paper. Then the lobby and the elevator banks last, because the marble showed every scuff, and she liked to leave it clean when the morning guard arrived at 6. She had done this route so many times that her body knew the turns before her mind did. She was 44 years old. She had been cleaning other people's spaces since she was 19, and before Peachtree Center there had been a hotel on Cortlandt Street, a hospital on Boulevard, and a period she did not think about often. 3 years of irregular work and a marriage that ended before her son Marcus was old enough to remember it. She did not describe her life as hard. Hard implied complaint, and complaint implied there was someone to hear it. She described her life as hers. The numbers she carried tonight, $13.25 an hour, 48 hours this week, including the Saturday shift she had picked up from Jerome, whose wife had just delivered their first child. Her take-home for the month would be $2,912. Rent was $1,180. Electric had come in at $143 because of the February cold snap. Marcus needed $370 for spring semester welding materials at the technical college, equipment the program required students to purchase themselves. She had moved the math 4 times this week. It did not land differently the 4th time. She put in her left earbud. Not the right. The right canal had been sensitive since a sinus infection in November that she had treated with steam and salt water because the clinic copay was $45 she could not absorb that week. The left ear played Mahalia Jackson, not loudly, just enough to keep the quiet from becoming something heavier. What most people did not know about the building services industry in Atlanta, what Yvette had read in a union newsletter her co-worker pressed into her hand last fall, was that of the 3.1 million Americans employed in janitorial and building cleaning work, 71% were women of color. The average Atlanta wage ran 12% below the national median of $14.42, and 68% carried no employer-sponsored health insurance. She had read those numbers and recognized herself in all 3. She had not signed the petition attached to the newsletter. She was not sure she could afford to be known as the kind of person who signed petitions. Floors 36 and 37 went quickly. She emptied trash cans, wiped surfaces, ran the microfiber across conference tables, straightened chairs to a consistent distance from the table edge. Nobody had asked her to do the last part. It was simply the difference between a room that had been cleaned and a room that had been cared for, and she had decided long ago she was only capable of the second kind. Floor 38 took longer. It always did. The northeast corner office, the large one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Midtown, was almost always still occupied when she arrived. The man who worked there kept hours that made no sense to her. She had seen his light at midnight, at 2, at 3:45 in the morning. She did not know his name. The placard beside the door read only, Beaumont Capital Partners. She had never asked. Tonight the corner office was dark. She let herself in. The desk was wide and uncluttered. One item broke the pattern. A small frame photograph in dark wood facing away from the door. She noticed it the way she noticed anything that served no practical function. carefully, without touching it. But on her way to the far side, her cartwheel caught the desk leg and the frame went flat. She picked it up. Two young people on a beach. The water behind them was gray-green, the color of the Georgia coast on a cloudy afternoon. The man was laughing with his whole face. The woman was not laughing. She was looking at the camera with an expression that was not quite a smile, something settled, the expression of a person who is exactly where they have chosen to be. In the lower corner, written in white ink, Tybee Island, 1982. Yvette looked at the woman's face. Something moved in her chest that she could not name. Not recognition exactly. Closer to almost remembering a word. The shape of it present, the sound of it gone. She stood the frame back the way she had found it. She finished the floor. At 2:17 in the morning, she was making a final pass when she noticed the cardboard box beside the recycling station at the hall's end. Flaps open, blue tape across the top reading, Personal, RB. She reached in to transfer the contents without looking at them. Her hand touched a paper envelope. She pulled it out. The paper had gone the color of weak tea. The flap had been opened at some point, not torn, carefully, the way a person opens something they intend to read more than once. Upper left corner in handwriting she did not recognize, blue ink gone slightly purple with age. Ruth Ann Caldwell, 447 Vine Street, Atlanta, GA, and in the center, a name and a New York address she did not know, with below it, stamped in faded red, return to sender. The postmark read 1984. Ruth Ann Caldwell was the name on her own birth certificate, listed under mother. 447 Vine Street was the address where she had been born. She did not open the envelope. She stood in the hallway under the flickering fluorescent light. The one she had requested be fixed 3 times, and held a letter that had been sent back before her mother ever received it. Then she placed it in the front pocket of her cart supply tray under the microfiber cloths. She finished the haul. She clocked out at 5:51. Outside, Peachtree Street was the color of pre-dawn. A delivery truck idled at the curb. Yvette stood on the sidewalk before walking to the bus stop. She did not look up at the 38th floor. She did not know why she was careful not to. She just was. Conrad James Beaumont had not always worked on the 38th floor. He had started on the ground, in the most literal sense, loading dock of a textile warehouse on the east end of San Georgia. Summer of 1977, 16 years old, earning $2.90 an hour because the foreman had told him the union rate didn't apply to summer workers, and Conrad had not yet learned enough to know that was a lie. His father worked the same dock. The Beaumont men, as far back as Conrad could trace, had moved other people's things from one place to another and collected wages that were always slightly less than what the work was worth. Conrad had decided at 16 that he would be the last one. He was not wrong. He was simply 40 years late in understanding what being right would cost him. Beaumont Capital Partners occupied the top 4 floors of Peachtree Center's East Tower. The 38th floor was Conrad's, his office, his conference room, his assistant's station outside the glass door that he kept propped open because closed doors in his own building made him feel like a man pretending to be important. He was 67 years old. He had $3.1 billion in managed assets across 14 commercial properties in 6 cities. He employed 2,312 people, a number his CFO knew precisely, and Conrad had memorized because he believed a man should know how many people's rent depended on his decisions. He had been awake since 4:45 that morning. He was frequently awake since 4:45 in the morning. His doctor had a name for this. Conrad had a different name for it. He called it the tax. 2 weeks ago, in the examination room of a medical office on West Peachtree Street, a doctor named Hargrove had looked at Conrad's chart, looked at Conrad and said, "Your blood work is unremarkable for a man. Your age, your heart is structurally sound. Your blood pressure is managed." Then he paused in the way doctors paused, when the next sentence was the one they had been building toward. He said, "You have maybe 12 to 15 good years of full capacity left if you make changes. Not an emergency, a horizon." Conrad had thanked him. He had sat in the back of the car for 22 minutes without telling the driver to go anywhere. 15 years. He had spent 40 years building something that now ran itself well enough that he could disappear for a month and the numbers would not notice. The buildings would stand, the leases would renew, and he would leave it to no one. His first marriage had ended in 1998, his second in 2009. He had a son from the first marriage, Devin, 31 years old, living in Portland, who called on Christmas and on Conrad's birthday, and on no other occasion, and who had made it clear in a conversation 6 years ago that he did not want the company, did not want the responsibility, and did not want the kind of relationship with his father that the company would require. Conrad respected this. He did not pretend it didn't hurt. There was one other name in his files. He had carried it for 44 years. In 1983, Conrad was 23 years old, living in a one-bedroom apartment in Atlanta's Vine City neighborhood, working 2 jobs and taking night classes in business. He had been with Ruth and Caldwell for 14 months. She was 22, the most specific and clear-eyed person he had ever known. The kind of woman who said exactly what she meant and expected the same of everyone around her. He had loved her with the particular intensity of a young man who cannot yet distinguish between loving someone and needing someone to believe in him. When Ruth Ann told him she was pregnant, Conrad had stood in her kitchen on Vine Street and felt the floor reorganize itself beneath him. Not because he didn't want the child, because he could not see the version of himself that was adequate to a child. He saw his father. He saw the doc. He saw a boy growing up in the same arithmetic of not enough that Conrad had been trying to escape since he was 16. He left 3 weeks later. He told himself he would come back when he was ready. He wrote her a letter from New York 6 months after, explaining the fear in the only vocabulary he had then: practical, financial, inadequate. He mailed it. It came back. Returned to sender. He tried once more, a year later. A different address found through a mutual acquaintance. That letter also came back. After the second return, he told himself that Ruth Ann had made her decision and he would respect it. He had spent the next 4 decades occasionally wondering whether that was true or whether it was simply the most comfortable story available to a man who had done something he could not undo. 3 years ago, at 64, Conrad had hired Garrett Willis. Willis was a private investigator based in Buckhead, methodical and unsentimental, who sent typed reports in plain language with no editorializing. His most recent report read in part, Trail ends 1991, following subject's relocation from Vine City. No forwarding address filed. Daughter school records last accessed 1987, Vine Street Elementary. Current whereabouts unknown. Mother deceased March 2019, Fulton County records confirmed. Conrad had read the report 9 times. He kept it in the same drawer as the photograph from Tybee Island. That photograph had been taken in October of 1982, 3 months before Ruth Ann told him she was pregnant. A friend had taken it on a day trip to the Georgia coast, the 4 of them in a borrowed car with the heat not working and gospel on the radio. Conrad remembered the cold and the gray water and the way Ruth Ann had looked at the camera like she was deciding when to trust it. He had kept the photograph for 44 years and had never been able to explain this adequately, even to himself. Tonight, he had stayed late, going through a box of old files his assistant had flagged for shredding. Personal papers from the early years of the company. He had pulled a few things to keep. He had left the box in the hall for overnight processing. He had not noticed, going through the box, that the envelope from 1984 was no longer in it. He stood at the window for a while before shutting off the light. 42 floors below, the service entrance was still lit. He could see the faint shape of a cart being loaded into a vehicle. He watched it for a moment with the attention of a man who had spent 40 years looking at cities from above and only recently begun to wonder what he had missed by doing so. He turned off the light. He took the elevator down. 3 weeks passed the way nights pass when you are tired enough. In segments, each one identical to the last, the hours marked not by clocks but by tasks completed and floors finished, and the silence that settles into a building after 2 in the morning. Yvette had not opened the envelope. It sat in the front pocket of her work bag, inside a plastic sleeve she used for important documents. Marcus's school, her lease, her mother's death certificate. She had moved the envelope into the sleeve the night she brought it home, handling it by the edges, not entirely sure why she was being so careful with something she hadn't decided what to do with yet. She told herself she was waiting. She did not examine what she was waiting for. On the 7th night after finding the envelope, Conrad Beaumont was in the building when she arrived. This was not unusual. What was unusual was that he was not in his office. He was in the large conference room on the 38th floor, sitting not at the table but in one of the chairs along the wall, in the dark, facing the window. The city spread out below him in its nighttime grid, the red and white of I-75 traffic, the green of Piedmont Park in the middle distance, the amber glow Atlanta produced when its lights hit its own low clouds. She knocked on the open door. He turned. She asked if he needed the room cleaned. He said no. She nodded and began to move her cart past the doorway. Then she stopped. In 25 years of cleaning other people's spaces, she had learned to read the temperature of a room the way some people read weather. This room was the temperature of a man who had run out of places to put something he was carrying and had sat down in the dark because moving forward required a direction, and he did not currently have one. She had sat in that temperature herself. She reached into the lower shelf of her cart and took out her personal thermos, black, dented at the base, filled with coffee she had brewed at home at 10:15, because the building's break room machine produced something that tasted like hot water that had heard rumors about coffee. She poured a cup into the thermos lid. She set it on the small table just inside the conference room doorway without stepping inside. She said, "It's just coffee. It gets cold up here." Then she left. She was on 22 when she heard the elevator move. She did not think about it. The following night, he was at his desk when she came through to clean. He said nothing for the first few minutes. Then, while she was wiping down the window ledge on the far side of the room, he said, "You've been cleaning this floor for a while." She said, "3 years in April." He said, "Do you work every night?" She said, "5 nights. I pick up Saturdays when someone needs coverage." He said, "That's a long week." She said, without stopping what she was doing, "It's a normal week." He was quiet after that. Not the quiet of a man who had nothing to say, but the quiet of a man who was recalibrating, who had said something he thought was sympathetic and understood, too late, that it had landed as something else. She did not help him out of it. She finished the window ledge, moved to the credenza, worked her way around the room in the order she always worked. Before she left, he said, "Thank you. For the coffee last night," she said, "You left a 20 on the desk." He said, "I always do." She looked at him then directly, briefly. She said, "I know. I've been putting them in the lost and found at the security desk for 3 years. The guard uses them for the holiday food drive." She pushed her cart out of the office. She heard him make a sound that was not quite a laugh. She did not turn around. On the 14th night, she arrived to find the conference room in use. A late meeting, 4 people around the table. She started on the opposite end of the floor. When she came back an hour later, the meeting had ended and the visitors were gone. Conrad was still there, alone at the table, with a box open in front of him. An old box, the kind that held papers rather than files. The kind that came from a closet that hadn't been opened in years. He was reading something. He stopped when he heard the cart. He looked at the box. He looked at her. Then he looked back at the box and said, not quite to her, "I've been trying to decide what to do with things I should have dealt with a long time ago." She said nothing. She had learned that some statements were questions in disguise and some were not, and the best way to tell the difference was to wait. He closed the lid of the box. He said, "You have family here in Atlanta?" She said, "My son and my sister on the south side." He said, "Your parents?" She said, "My mother passed in TT19. I never knew my father." He looked at the box again. Something shifted in his face, not dramatically, not the way faces shifted in films, but the small interior rearrangement of a person absorbing information they were not prepared for. He said, "I'm sorry about your mother. She said she was a good woman. She did everything by herself and she never complained about it. She said it simply, the way a person states a fact they have long since stopped needing to perform." Then she began to wipe down the conference table, starting at the far end, moving toward him in the steady, unhurried way she moved through every room. He watched her for a moment. Then he picked up the box and carried it out of the conference room himself, which was not something she had seen him do before. She heard him set it down somewhere in the hallway. She heard the sound of the elevator. Then the floor was quiet again. She worked until 5:43. On her way out, she passed a recycling station. The box was there resealed. The label now read, "Shred Personal RB. Hold, do not process." She did not know what that meant. She put her card away. She went home. That night, she took the envelope out of its plastic sleeve. She held it in her hands for a long time. She did not open it. She put it back. She thought about what she had said, that she had never known her father, and the way he had looked at the box when she said it. The look of a man absorbing something he already knew and had been pretending for a very long time not to. On the 22nd night, Yvette's sister Paulette drove up from the south side with 3 boxes. They had been in Paulette's storage unit since their mother died. The paper boxes Ruth Ann had kept in the back of her closet, the ones neither of them had been able to open in the months right after she passed. Paulette had texted to say she was cleaning out the unit. Did Yvette want to go through them first? Yvette had said yes without thinking about why. She knew why now. Paulette stayed for an hour. They ate and talked around the boxes the way people talk around things they are not ready to open. After she left, Yvette sat on the kitchen floor, not because there was no chair, but because the floor felt more honest, and pulled the first box toward her. Her mother had kept everything. Church bulletins from 1991, a birthday card from Yvette, age 7, drawn in crayon, report cards, a bundle of letters from a cousin in Birmingham to get tied with 3 photographs of a woman Yvette did not recognize, on the back of each, a name in pencil. Mama's mother, 1953. Yvette held the photograph of her great-grandmother for a moment, studying the face, the set of the jaw, the way the eyes held the camera, with that same settled, wholly present expression Ruth Ann had in the Tybee Island photograph. She found the Bible in the second box, small, black, the cover worn soft at the corners. Inside the front page in her mother's handwriting, Ruth Ann Evelyn Caldwell, her name and below it a date, the year she had been confirmed at 14, And below that, tucked between the Bible's cover and the first thin page, a paper envelope. Not old, not tea-colored. This one was white, still firm at the edges, sealed but never sent. The flap licked and pressed down, but no address written on the front, no stamp. On the back, in her mother's handwriting, 2 words, "Ols." For Yvette, her hands were very still. She opened it. Inside was a single folded page, and inside the fold a second envelope. Older, the paper gun the color of weak tea. The flap carefully opened. She recognized it before she read the return address. She had seen its twin in a cardboard box on the 38th floor 3 weeks ago. She set the older envelope aside. She unfolded the single page first. Her mother had written it in the last year of her life. The handwriting was slower than Yvette remembered, the letters more deliberate, the hand of a woman who was taking her time because she understood that time was what she had least of. She wrote that she had kept a secret for 44 years, not out of cruelty, but out of a protection that had become its own kind of harm. She wrote that a man named Conrad Beaumont had loved her once, when they were both young and afraid and did not yet know how to stay. He had left, and she had tried to be angry, and somewhere along the way, the anger had turned into something quieter and harder to name. She wrote, "I never told you because I did not know how to tell you what I did not fully understand myself. I did not know if knowing would make you feel found or make you feel discarded. I chose silence because I could not choose between those two things. I know that was not my choice to make. I am sorry it took me this long to say so." Then, open the envelope I left inside. It arrived at my door in 1984 with a stamp that said "Return to sender." He did not know I had moved. He could not have known. I opened it because I needed to know what he had tried to say. Yvette put the letter down on the kitchen floor. She looked at the ceiling. The apartment was quiet. Marcus was working nights. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car passed and its headlights moved across the ceiling in a long, slow arc and were gone. She had spent 44 years with a space where a father's name should have been. She had stopped asking at 16 because her mother's face when she asked had been the face of a person standing at the edge of something, and Yvette had decided she did not need to be the thing that pushed her over. She had carried that decision for 28 years quietly, the way she carried everything, without putting it down, without making a sound that might be confused for complaint. She picked up the old envelope. She unfolded what was inside. The paper was thin, the kind that had been good stationery once. The handwriting was small and pressed hard into the page, the handwriting of a young man writing something he had gone over in his head many times before the pen touched the paper. The date at the top, March 1984, Atlanta, then a New York address. He wrote about being afraid. Not in general, specifically, the fear of a man who had grown up watching his father work a dock for wages that were never enough and who could see the same life waiting for him if he stayed in the wrong place at the wrong time. He wrote, "I know that fear is not the same as an excuse. I am not writing this as an excuse." He wrote that he thought about the child every day. He wrote, "I kept thinking about names. I wanted her to have a name that meant something about being alive, about continuing. I thought about the name Yvette. I do not know if you used it. I do not know if you will ever let me know." He wrote that he would come back when he was standing on solid ground. He never came back. Yvette sat on the kitchen floor for a long time, the letter in her hands, her mother's letter beside her. The Bible opened to the first page. Her mother's name written in young handwriting in the year she was 14. She did not cry right away. What she felt first was not grief and not anger. It was something closer to recognition, a shape she had been carrying her whole life suddenly having a name, arriving in her body before it arrived in her mind. She thought about the 38th floor and the conference room in the dark. A man who had sat in the wrong temperature for a very long time, looking for the same thing she had stopped looking for at 16. She folded both letters carefully. She put them in their envelopes. She placed them in the Bible, between the cover and the first page, where her mother had kept them. Then she sat with her back against the cabinet, and her knees pulled up and let the kitchen be quiet around her for a while. She had a decision to make. She was not going to make it tonight. She did not go to him the next day, or the day after that. She went on the fourth day, in the morning, between the end of her shift and the start of the world that operated in daylight. She had not slept. She had sat at her kitchen table with the Bible in front of her and thought about the difference between a decision made from anger and a decision made from clarity and whether she was capable, at this particular moment, of the second kind. She decided she was. She did not take the envelope. She took only herself, her scrub still on, her work bag over one shoulder, her badge clipped to her chest from the shift that had just ended. She rode the main elevator for the first time. Not the service elevator, the main one, the one with the mirrored wall and the floor indicator that chimed at each level. She watched her own face in the mirror as the numbers climbed. 35, 36, 37:38. The assistant station outside Conrad's office was unmanned at 6:43 in the morning. The glass door was propped open the way it always was. Conrad was at his desk. He looked up when he heard her footsteps. She sat down in the chair across from his desk without being asked. She placed both hands flat on her knees. She said, "My mother's name was Ruth Ann Caldwell. She lived on Vine Street. She died in 2019 and she left me a letter. And inside that letter was a letter you wrote in 1984 that came back to her stamped return to sender." Conrad did not move. The color did not leave his face so much as rearrange itself, something behind his eyes adjusting, settling. The way a structure settles when the last piece has been placed and the weight is finally distributed the way it was always meant to be. He said, "I know." She said, "How long have you known?" He said, "Garrett Willis called me 4 days ago. I have been trying to decide how to come to you." She looked at him. She said, "Why didn't you?" He said, "Because I did not know what I had the right to ask for. I have been thinking about that question for 4 days, and I still do not have a clean answer." The office was quiet. On the desk between them, there was no folder, no document, no prepared offer. Just the desk and the morning light and the city below beginning its daily process of becoming itself. Yvette said, "I am not here to give you something. I am not here to offer forgiveness or make something easier for you. I am 44 years old and I raised my son by myself and I watched my mother do the same before me. And I have made my peace with what cost. I am here because there is a thing I want that only you can give me, and it has nothing to do with money or a name on a document." He said, "What is it?" She said, "I want you to tell me about her, the version of her you knew before she became my mother. What she was like at 22, when the world was still deciding what to do with her. Whether she laughed the way I think she laughed, what she was afraid of, whether she knew, when you took that photograph at Tybee Island, that she was going to be someone who carried everything alone and did it anyway." Conrad was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had a quality she had not heard in it before. Not authority, not strategy, something older than those things. He said, "She laughed at things other people didn't think were funny, specific things. She laughed at the way pigeons walked. She laughed at overly formal language in ordinary situations. She had this laugh that started slow and then caught up with itself. She was not afraid of very many things. She was afraid of being ordinary. She was afraid of becoming invisible." He stopped. He said, "She was the least invisible person I have ever known." Yvette did not speak for a moment. She looked at her hands on her knees. Then she looked at him. She said, "I am not going to pretend this is simple. You are a stranger to me, and shared blood does not change that, and I am not going to perform from a reunion for either of our benefits. What I am willing to do is have this conversation and see what comes after it, without deciding in response on what that needs to look like." He said, "That is more than I deserve." She said, "Yes, it is." This was the moment that Sylvia Pratt chose to arrive. She knocked twice and walked in before either of them responded, which told Yvette everything she needed to know. Sylvia Pratt was 52, precise in the way people are precise when precision is their primary defense, wearing a charcoal blazer and carrying a portfolio that had not been opened. She said, "Conrad, I need 5 minutes. It's about the estate amendment filing." Conrad said, "Not now, Sylvia," she said. "I spoke with the attorneys this morning. There are questions about the verification process. Given the circumstances, it would be appropriate to." She paused, looked at Yvette with the particular look of a person calculating risk to particularly. Yvette watched this without expression. Conrad said, "I am aware of the verification process." Sylvia said, "She is a building services employee. We have no documentation beyond." Conrad, "A DNA result is one thing. We have a responsibility to the company and to the other stakeholders too." Conrad said, and his voice did not rise. "Sylvia, this woman cleaned my office for 3 years. She found a letter I had been trying to deliver for 40 years, and she did not open it, and she did not use it. She came to me at 6 in the morning in her work clothes because she wanted to know what her mother laughed at when she was 22. I am aware of what the attorneys think. I am asking you to leave this room." Sylvia looked at him for a moment. She looked at Yvette. Then she turned and walked out. The glass door, which was always propped open, swung closed behind her. Yvette looked at it. She said, "She's not wrong about the verification." Conrad said, "I know she isn't." She said, "I'll do it, not for a will or a document. Because I want to know the same way you want to know. Because it belongs to both of us." He nodded once. The nod of a man who has stood at the edge of something for 44 years and has finally, without drama, stepped back. Outside the window, Atlanta was fully morning now. The flat white of a February day, even and clear, the kind of light that doesn't flatter anything, but shows everything exactly as it is. 18 months later, Yvette Caldwell had an office on the 4th floor of Peachtree Center. She had asked for the 4th floor specifically. The 38th was available. Conrad had offered it. along with an assistant, a parking space in the executive garage, and a corner view of Midtown that cost more per square foot than the apartment she had lived in for 11 years. She had thanked him and said she wanted the fourth floor. He had looked at her in a way that meant he understood exactly why, and he had not asked her to explain. The fourth floor had a window that faced east. In the mornings, the light came in low and flat across the desk and lit up the dust in the air and made the room feel inhabited rather than appointed. She liked this. She had spent enough of her life in rooms that felt built to impress. She wanted a room that felt built to work in. Her title was Director of Building Services and Workforce Equity. She had proposed it herself in a two-page document written at her kitchen table at 1 in the morning, 11 days after the conversation in Conrad's office. The document proposed a systematic review of benefits coverage, wage structures, and working conditions for all 340 building services employees across Beaumont Capital's 14 properties. It proposed bringing every worker to a minimum of $15.75 an hour within 18 months. It proposed employer-sponsored health insurance with no exclusions for part-time workers over 20 hours. It proposed a professional development fund for certifications and continuing education, not buried in a handbook, but available on request in plain language on a single page posted in every break room across all 14 properties. Conrad had read the document once. He had called her that after once. The timeline is aggressive, she had said. I know the work. He had said, I know you do. Done. Marcus finished his electrical certification in May and accepted a position with a contracting firm working commercial construction in Midtown. He was 22 years old and earning $23.40 an hour with full benefits. On the Friday of his first week, he called his mom's job site. He did not have much to say. He said, Mom, I'm on the 14th floor of something. She said, how does it look up there? He said, pretty good. There was a pause, and then he said, you doing okay? She said, yes, baby, I'm doing okay. She was. Conrad and Yvette had breakfast together every Wednesday morning, not on the 38th floor, not in a private dining room. At a diner on Edgewood Avenue called Lorene's, the kind of place that had been on that corner for 31 years and had never changed the layout of its tables. They arrived at 7:45 and ordered coffee and talked, not always about easy things. There were mornings when the conversation stalled between two people who shared history they had not shared together, when the weight of 44 years of unsaid things made the present tense difficult to navigate. On those mornings, they sat with it. Neither of them rushed to fill the space. They were both people who had learned to stay with discomfort rather than move around it. This was, Yvette had come to think, perhaps the most honest inheritance she had received from a man who had not been there to give her anything else. The DNA test had come back in February, 6 weeks after their first conversation. Paternity confirmed, 99.8% probability. Yvette had looked at the result for a long time. She had not felt what she expected to feel, which was relief. What she felt was something more like completion, not the closing of a wound, but the closing of a question, which is a different thing entirely. She had not changed her name. She remained Yvette Marie Caldwell. This was not a statement about Conrad, and it was not a statement about the past. It was a statement about her mother, whose name she had always carried, and about the woman who had raised her alone and been afraid of becoming invisible and been the least invisible person in any room she had ever entered. On a Thursday afternoon in late March, Yvette opened the bottom drawer of her desk. She took out two things: the framed photograph of Ruth Ann at Tybee Island, the one Conrad had given her the week after their first conversation, and the Bible, small and black, with the letters inside still folded between the cover and the first thin page. She set the photograph on the window ledge where the morning light would find it. She looked at her mother's face, 22 years old, the gray-green water behind her. That expression, settled, clear, wholly present, the expression of a woman who had already decided who she was and was simply waiting for the world to catch up. Yvette left the office at 5:17. She took the stairs to the ground floor, not from obligation, not from habit, but because she had found that the stairs gave her something the elevator did not, a moment between the work and the world. On the ground floor, she pushed open the door to the main lobby. Jerome was at the supply station near the service entrance, restocking his cart for the evening shift. She had known Jerome for 3 years. She knew his wife's name was Adrian and that they had a daughter, 4 months old, named after Adrian's grandmother. She knew Jerome's left knee gave him trouble in the cold and that he had been with the building for 6 years and had never once been late. She stopped. She said, Jerome. He looked up. She said, the parental leave update went into effect last Monday. Full pay 8 weeks, available to both parents. HR should have sent the notice, but I know how those go. Make sure you got it. He looked at, he said, I didn't get anything. She said, "I'll have someone follow up today. It's yours." He nodded slowly, the nod of a man receiving something he had not allowed himself to expect. She walked out through the main entrance onto Peachtree Street. The late March air was cool and particular. Not quite winter, not quite spring, the city in its best and most honest season. She did not look up at the 38th floor. She did not look back through the glass at the lobby she had spent 3 years cleaning. She simply walked, the way a person walks when they know where they are going, and they know, without needing to say it, that the ground beneath them is solid and that they put it there themselves. I did not set out to write a story about a father and a daughter. I set out to write a story about a letter that never arrived. I have been thinking for a long time about the things people try to send and cannot deliver. The apologies written and sealed but never mailed. The explanations held back because the right moment kept not arriving. The words that traveled as far as a return address and came back unopened. I think most of us have a version of that letter somewhere. Something we meant to say to someone we lost or left or who left us before we understood what leaving would cost. What moved me about Yvette was her refusal to be defined by the absence. She did not spend 44 years waiting. She built a life. She raised a son. She straightened chairs to a consistent distance from the table edge in rooms where no one knew her name. And when the answer finally arrived, she met standing up in her work clothes with both hands flat on her knees. That is not a small thing. That is what dignity looks like when it has been practiced long enough to become simply who you are. Now it is your turn. Have you ever received something late? An apology, an explanation, a truth you had stopped expecting? Did it change anything? Or had you already built your life so well around the absence that when the answer finally came, it barely moved the walls? I want to know. Both answers are worth telling. Leave your response in the comments. Drop your city and your local time while you are there. I read every single one, not just the first few, all of them. And the conversations that happen in those comments are some of the most honest this community produces. They remind me every week why these stories are worth telling. If this story landed somewhere inside you, if you found yourself thinking about a letter someone never sent, or a name you carry without knowing where it came from, or a woman you know who cleans up after a world that never learned her name, please share it. Not for the algorithm. Because there is someone in your life who needs to hear a story about a woman who finally rode the main elevator up, who met the truth in her work clothes with both hands flat on her knees, and who walked out the front door for the first time and did not look back. If you are new here, this is the place we come to remember that the people who move quietly through the world are not invisible. They are the ones holding everything up. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss what comes next. We have more stories where this one came from, and every one of them matters. And if you have been watching for a while and have never left a comment, let today be the day. Stay kind, stay blessed, and never underestimate the power of one quiet act of love.